Hey everyone, this is Jim from Ease Seating Systems. I apologize if I sound a little hoarse today. Gotta love Michigan weather changes, so I can tell my voice is a little bit affected by it, but I'm sure a lot of people can relate, especially if you live in the Midwest and deal with these temperature swings all the time. But I'm here today with Erik Johnson to talk a little bit about video games. It's not really in the sense that you'd expect. Video games have really evolved over the years and they're being incorporated in a lot more things. I actually just read a statistic not that long ago from the Entertainment Software Association. 67% of adults in the US play video games, and 76% of kids play video games. So it's a pretty relevant topic, I'd say. Um, just a little bit, just a little tidbit. I first learned about Erik through a continuing education course that I took. He was talking just about that, adaptive video games. And I remember being really captivated by the story. So when we first decided to do this podcast, like you were one of the first people who came to my mind. And I thought, man, I got to reach out and see if he'd be willing to talk with me. So I really appreciate you joining us today. Could you just share a little bit about yourself, your bio, your background?
Sure.
I know I read a little bit about your talk about on your website. You have some military experience, and it sounds like that kind of shaped your career path and whatnot.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here with you guys and chatting. Um, I guess my story kind of begins a little ways back. I had enlisted in the Army in 1996 and uh, was in a situation where we were actually gearing up to go to Bosnia. So this is all pre 9/11. We were going to
Yeah.
Bosnia. We were out in the field, hadn't left yet, and kind of just prepping, and we left the field, and I was in a really bad vehicle rollover where myself and my first sergeant were burned really bad from that rollover, and I was medevac to this hospital in Germany, and then later to a burn center in San Antonio where I met my first occupational therapist, and I of course said, "Oh yeah, time for some physical therapy." And she very quickly corrected me, and just really started to fall in love with the profession. Really tried to start kind of learning the subtle differences, what made OT unique and distinct, and one of the biggest things was just its holistic perspective on life and occupation,
Hmm.
and kind of where we sit in that mix. And so um, but while I was recovering from my burns, there was a moment where I was in what they called a medical hold company at the time. And now they call them like warrior transition brigades. But I was in a room with another dude that was going through some cancer treatment. He was, real young, maybe like
Hmm.
19, 20. And I remember he was going through chemo and I was burned real bad. And, I had all these scars and wounds that were trying to heal. And I remember just we were both miserable and we had laughed together. And I remember him playing Final Fantasy VII, the greatest Final Fantasy game there is. And I would just watch him, and it was so therapeutic just to be together in game. Just building the bonds, knowing that when we went to eat, that we want to go back to being together, playing the game, and that's kind of where it all started for me for gaming, just like the potential that games could have as a therapeutic medium, right?
Yeah.
So you fast forward a bit, and then I'm in the army. I decide that I want to be an occupational therapist. So I go through this program. They put me through OT school. I graduated in 2005, and I come out. And if you guys recall, the Nintendo Wii came out in 2007,
Hmm.
and that really changed a lot of things for the gaming industry as it relates to therapies. OT very quickly saw that it had this really interesting, unique element that was using occupation-based movements to engage in gaming.
Hmm.
And so I immediately started to use the Wii as a therapeutic tool because I knew that if I could give my clients a medium that was fun, that compliance for treatment would be greater. And so
Mhm.
that was a big kind of push. So I started using gaming that way, more as a therapeutic tool. And in 2009, I got a call from the OT consultant to the Surgeon General, and she asked me to go develop a brain injury program over in Afghanistan. And I was trying to figure out what I would do there, how I would treat clients, and all these different ways to be able to do OT in a combat zone. And when I was doing my research, one of the things I discovered, not really discovery, but I made note of, is that I'm working with a generation of humans that have grown up with gaming. And so it
Yeah.
was like your 18 to 35-year-old human.
Yeah.
And I know, like, there's some cognition tools out there that you could measure and use for to understand somebody's cognitive awareness. I was treating mild traumatic brain injury, and so I was trying to think of different ways to really challenge that in different people. But I realized that treating a concussion acutely, somebody that just got blown up in a vehicle, if I were to go and sit in front of them and say, here's a swatch of leather and I want you to do a whip stitch for me, like, one, they would have no idea what I'm talking about. Two,
Yeah.
is this a joke? My buddy just got killed and you're asking me to stitch some leather. And so I realized, like, that wasn't going to be something that I was going to do. So trying to develop a different way to engage with the clients, but still tease out some of the symptoms that they were showing from the brain injury. And so,
Hmm.
so we did a bunch of different things, but one of them was gaming, and one of them, and so I really started to look to video games and look at their potential therapeutic components that I could use to treat brain injury. And so we would use like different brain games, like Big Brain Academy on the Wii, or I would use the Xbox. I would actually use DJ Hero for different complex components for cognition, and just different things. And so when I get back, and so this all led to me coming back from Afghanistan using gaming, in different ways. And when I got back from Afghanistan, I knew that I was going to be the chief of OT for the amputee center there
Okay.
at Walter Reed. And while I was there, I would start doing interviews with my or the initial evaluation with my clients, and they lose a limb, they lose hands, they lose legs, whatever. You would ask them, like, so what are some of the things that you've lost that you want to get back? And I usually kind of came to two different answers, and one would be, I want to have sex again, and I want to play video games, and of course there's a bunch of other things, but those are kind of like my top two. And so we certainly could cover the intimacy and sexual intimacy and all that as OTs.
Yeah.
But gaming was one of those that I was really excited to work with them about. So I started exploring a bunch of different types of gaming solutions and different
Hmm.
types of controllers and different types of you know ways to be able to engage in a video game. And that kind of was really where that path started, getting into that adaptive video
Hmm.
game space, and really kind of where my career started to take
Yeah.
off.
Hey, so at that time, what kind of, I guess, adaptive controllers were out there?
Yeah, there
Probably not
wasn't.
much.
There wasn't. Matter of fact, there's a couple things that we would do with controllers, and we had to get really creative. And I'll show you a couple examples of what we would do in those days to kind of get people to game. I did some very simple things, such as like building a splint so it could hold a controller, or
Hmm.
positioning an arm so that it could, be in the right space. But besides that, like, that was kind of where my knowledge was somewhat limited, and so I
Yeah.
wanted to make sure that, discovering that I was limited in that, you know, I uh, I had this chance meeting with a guy who came down to Walter Reed, and he saw some of the stuff that I was doing, and he said, why don't you just rewire that controller so that button's over there, or like you can build this off to that. And I was like, I don't know how to do that, you know? And so
Right.
he's like, well, I'll help you with that. Like I can do that. I would love to be able to serve the amputee population or the military population that way. And so he
Nice.
started doing some different things for me. And so, like for example, this is example of a controller that he reworked. So this is from an
Yeah.
Xbox One. And so it looks like your typical controller, and there's your ABXY. But let's say you lost your left hand. How are you going to control the things over here? So, like your D pad or your triggers, how are
Yep.
you going to control that? And so, what he would do is he'd break the controller apart, drill some holes in here, and rewire it so that your buttons are now on the right side. So if you're
Nice.
a one-handed gamer, you can control anything that you need to control over there is here at your fingertips. And he'd also turn them over so you could work on the bottom side as well. So and sometimes that just wasn't good enough, and so he would do different types of things. Like he would take that controller and he would actually have wires that came out of it, and so
Hmm.
instead of just using your traditional buttons. So you see like the ABXY are gone. This is a guy who lost his right hand, or and so maybe now he's got his analog sticks over here using his residual limb or forearm or something, and then his ABXY are now over here on the left side of the controller. And on top of that, his two triggers he rewired to have as foot pedals. So maybe this was a
Oh,
single
okay.
upper extremity amputee, and now he's got his triggers and bumpers here on the floor, so he can now use the different parts of his body to be able to engage in the game. So that's what we would do to start. So that's how kind of the whole process start. That's so our nonprofit that was born from those experiences is called Warfighter Engaged, and that's kind of where that those conversations started to happen.
Okay, cool. So, video games and their potential. I read, I think it was on your website. You said that I've heard you say, video games have a healing power. So, can
Yeah,
you elaborate just a little bit more on
sure.
that?
Yeah, so and this goes back way back to those first kind of ideas that gaming could have this therapeutic um, property that something else might not have.
Mm-hmm.
When I was burned and I had my friend that was a cancer patient, and and there's a few things that I see here. So one, if you're an occupational therapist listening to this, one, that one of our big go-to solutions is using occupation as means to an end, right?
Sure.
As means and ends. And so I always try to have an opportunity to use different types of purposeful activity and whatnot
Mm-hmm.
to treat a client. That doesn't mean every client gets video games. It just means if it's appropriate for that specific person, I'm going to use it. If somebody
Yep.
has failed in different ways, I might introduce it to them as potential. And so there's several things that happen when you play video games, and one of them is that if you're I always preach playing I always preach co-op gaming, and what co-op gaming is, it means is that you're playing a game together with a friend.
Okay.
And back in the day, if you looked at that, that was brother and sister or friends sitting side by side on a
Yep.
couch playing
Yeah.
video games together. Um, and as that evolved, now we have online components where you can do co-op games where I'm in Texas and you're in Michigan, and we could get on a
Mhm.
game together and we could do a co-op game, at the same time. And there's a lot to say about that. So if I'm somebody that's coming back from Afghanistan and I really, you know, found a lot of solace in gaming to chase away some of those demons or to normalize life or to be able to re-engage with some of the brothers and sisters that I fought with, I can get on gaming and have that opportunity to do that.
Sure.
And so therapeutically it gives me an open door to have those conversations, to say like, how are you doing, how's life,
Mm,
what's going on, all the while we're chasing down the bad guys in Halo or something.
sure.
And so I think there's a lot to say about that. And so the online component is very rich. I love that. But I always push for developers to create games that are couch co-op, is what they call it. And couch
Mhm.
co-op means you're sitting beside somebody. So think about a father trying to engage with his son, and saying
Mhm.
like, I just don't do the same things that he does. I don't engage with him. Like, he always wants to play video games. He doesn't ever want to do anything. But what if you were playing video games with him? Then is it therapeutic? Then is it purposeful?
Yeah.
That's a different story. I mean, it's no different than sitting beside, your humans at your family and playing a board game. It's different.
Mhm.
It's more interactive, and the story is told. Um, especially if you're on a team together working through a challenge, everything happens there. One of my favorite memories is with a physical therapist named John Lesher. He was one of my best friends in Afghanistan. He's still alive. He's still a great friend of mine. But when we were in Afghanistan, we played a game called Army of Two, and it's just two dudes, going through and getting all the bad guys and
Mhm.
saving, humanity or whatever. But it was really cool because in the moment, we were grieving. We had lost a couple of our guys, and so to be able to pull away from that, sit down together, play a game, kind of lose yourself in that space, was really therapeutic for us. And even to the day, if I'm at a used video game store and I see Army of Two, I take a quick picture and shoot it over to
Send it
them,
to
and
'em. Yeah.
no words need to be said, just that was significant. So
Yeah, yeah.
so there's an emotional, capacity about it, and then there's
Sure.
that physical therapeutic side that you potentially could gain different types of function that way.
Okay.
So when I say therapeutic, that's what I'm talking about.
Gotcha. So for people listening who aren't necessarily from a medical background, what you're saying is you can use video games as an end, like that's the end result. You want them to be able to play it.
Sure.
And then as a means, so you actually use playing the activity of playing video games to help create other or to achieve other goals is what
Right.
you're saying. So
Absolutely.
and I'm guessing it's not just like to improve physical function, right? Is there other, can you talk a little bit about other
Yeah,
areas you're
sure.
trying to
I think we all default to, oh, it's going to help with fine motor, or it'll help me do all these little things.
Mhm.
But one of the number one reasons I use it is for cognition, executive function. Um, so I mentioned using DJ Hero, that's an older game now.
Yeah.
But if you guys have ever played Rock Band, or if you've played any of those music games, there's
Yeah.
guitars, there's different things. So DJ Hero is the same concept. But think about if you were to have a brain injury. If you're listening to this and never had a concussion, you'll know what I'm talking about. But when concussions happen, it really boggles the brain down a bit, and so your reaction time is a little slower. You might have the photophobia, so the lights might be too bright.
Hmm.
You might have issues with problem solving. You might have irritability issues. And so, as you're treating certain things, you want to be able to introduce graded activity, meaning I can make it easier or I can make it harder so that we can achieve success and then build on that success. And so for DJ Hero, I really loved it because one, it had real-time current music. So you would have like Eminem and Jay-Z, or
Hmm.
they even had like Vanilla Ice, and but a bunch of different
Yeah, yeah.
cool genres of music that
Hmm.
you as the DJ would engage in. And so the controller was a turntable. And so they took the Xbox, the typical control you see, but they turned it into a turntable. And so your buttons were on the record, so you could
Yep.
scratch. And then you had different switches on your left side, or you can swap them either way. But you'd have to switch it over, turn a knob, flip a switch, and so it'd have a lot of components happening at the same time. So if I was working with somebody who is really wanting to work on that flash to bang time, like, I think it and it happens,
Yep.
then I can put them in this mix and work on some of those strategies. So you hear some good music, you're feeling the beat, and then it's going to prompt you to do something like, in order to keep this going, you need to push this button. And the simplest terms is like, just push the buttons, and you can keep the beat going. And as you get better, it's push the button and push this one at the same time, or push two buttons, or flip this switch and push these buttons. And then it's scratch the record, switch this over, push the buttons, and go faster. And so
Yeah.
you can, and that game is beautiful because I can, again, what we call grading the activity, meaning I can
Yeah.
make it easier or make it harder, more challenging. And so in that mix, like working with cognition, I certainly could have them go through crossword puzzles or do all those kind of like traditional old school
Yep.
cognitive tasks that we have done before, or I can make it more generationally relevant using strategies like this.
Nice. Nice. So I believe I read on your website, you're trying to create accessible solutions and create inclusivity for the gaming community on a whole. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that too?
Yeah, so one of the things that we have done quite a bit of is we've done a lot of advocacy, and
Mhm.
we've done it in different ways. Like this would be a perfect example of one. So, um, Warfighter started out with just saying we want to make gaming accessible for anyone. Like that is our goal in life, our mission. We want people to be able to play regardless of their situation, and we certainly did that. It was great. We're very successful at doing that, but we wanted to expand our kind of spectrum, if you will, to
Mhm.
because we saw a lot of people wanting more. Like, hey, can I, get on the phone call with this, or can I talk to you about something here, or hey, would you mind coming putting on a clinic somewhere for disability, clients with
Yeah.
disabilities and stuff. And so we started to look at different ways that we could expand. And so some of the ways was that being advocates for accessibility in the industry community. And for example, we will every once in a while we're given an opportunity to pop out. This is us at Microsoft, talking to developers at Microsoft
Wow.
and saying, hey, when you're developing games, let's make sure they're accessible. Let's make sure they have components that are easily attainable for people who are blind, or the deaf community. And
Yeah.
so there's a lot of different opportunities out there for accessibility and being able to um, really do the right thing for people who can't necessarily have, they don't necessarily have their own voice. And so
Yeah.
part of that was um, going out to stuff like that. But it's going to conferences, it's going to OT events and saying, hey, I need to make sure that we're talking the right language, that we're using the right things, going to different countries and saying, hey, you can make this space. And so again,
Mhm.
coming out and talking to industry, having an opportunity to pop in and pop out, advocating for those things is a big piece of it. So sometimes we'll have, a matter of fact, 343 Industries. Um, they call, or they reached out to me at one point in time. They're the people that have created the Halo franchise, and so
Mhm.
they reached out to me at one point and asked if I would talk with them about representation in their new Halo game. And actually, just
Nice.
recently, they're putting out new things for this new game, and this is a game that I worked on with them. But we talked about the different levels of amputations, what it would be like if veterans saw amputees in the game, and whatnot. But I can now say it because they've said it. But I had a NDA, so they were going to build amputees into the game, and so as you're building your Halo character, you can now be an amputee. You can have
Wow.
your actual body in there, and we did it at different levels. We'll do like humeral amputations, transradial amputations, an elbow disarticulation, shoulders disarticulation. And so they were very purposeful in making sure that when they were building this game that they did it the right way. And so that was another opportunity again to say, hey, let's make sure that it's done right,
Hmm.
so yeah.
So do you feel like the industry as a whole is trying to make a conscious effort
Yeah, I really
to
do. I think that so one of the things they talk about quite a bit is one of their big pushes is that if you begin a game process with accessibility in mind, it's not going to be an expensive adventure. Whereas if you build a game and not include
right.
accessibility and then try to retrofit it, that's going to be really expensive and a big time suck. And so there's a decent body of accessibility champions out there. Some OTs, but some people that are just in the industry, some people that work in, they're engineers, they work in video game world. And so
Mhm.
they're big advocates for pushing this narrative as well. And so it's actually
Awesome.
growing bigger and bigger, and people are evaluating accessibility options in every time a game comes out, and they'll say, hey, here's my review for the accessibility options. And there has been a lot of change within the last 10 years. It's been like massive amount of change, and it's getting better and better, and hopefully at some point there's no discussion about it because it's just something that everybody does.
Naturally. Yeah.
uh,
Wow. Yeah, I still remember, I think it was during your continuing education class, you said, yeah, I think you were part of that it was like a Microsoft intro video to accessibility, and didn't you
yeah.
say it was on the I think it was played during the Super Bowl, wasn't it?
Yeah. So
Which is
that was a
cool.
pretty cool. So if you, yeah, and that's a pretty decent segue. So if you were to kind of rewind a bit, a couple Super Bowls ago, so I talked about us sitting there in Microsoft's headquarters. So how that relationship started was they started seeing all these things that we were doing, and they really
Mhm.
liked it. And so they asked our team to come out to Redmond, Washington, where headquarters
Yeah.
is,
Mhm.
and talk to the developers. We actually did a hackathon with them, and so within the conversations, we started talking about having an accessible controller that essentially would skip that step of us tearing a controller apart, rewiring it, soldering different things in, and having to have this whole thing.
Yeah.
Um, this whole process, so it would save us all that time. So what came of it is the Xbox adaptive controller, and so this is what you're seeing right there. And so all these different switches here on my screen, these are all switches that we make at Warfighter Engaged.
Okay.
And so and you can use them in different ways, but essentially how the Xbox adaptive controller worked was, so instead of pulling apart the Xbox controller, they built in, and if you look at the back of this controller, there's 19 3.5 millimeter ports
Okay.
behind it. And 3.5 millimeters, if you don't know, is your headphone jack, right?
Yep. Yep.
And
Common.
so, tons of accessibility switches, tons of buttons and levers that you see out there have that 3.5 millimeters. And so, how it works is the brains are all in here. These are two buttons that work great. It's an A and B button, and this
Mhm.
is your D-pad. So if you look, can you see my pointer moving around?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. I can see it.
So if you see this typical controller, your D-pad is the same, and then you
Mhm.
have an A and B button uh, that are right here. Uh, so what makes this thing unique is that as I'm trying to engage in a game, and I'm trying to figure out different solutions for my specific client, I can position the buttons and switches anywhere that I want. So let's say that it was a upper extremity amputee and he had a long residual limb, let's say on the left side. So it's like a wrist disarticulation, meaning he lost his hand right at the wrist. He still
Okay.
has an elbow, he still has some pretty decent reach, but he doesn't have the fine motor dexterity maybe to move a typical analog stick, right? And so
Okay.
I could just take one of the sticks that we make and plug it into the controller and then build it out for him. And so this would be a built up almost like arcade style. And so he could use his residual limb to just work the analog stick here instead. Or if I wanted to put, if the buttons were too small to mash, or let's say you lost your right hand and you couldn't distinguish between the buttons because they were so small, um, I could plug in, let's say, these four switches or these four switches for my ABXY, and they just plug in right here, ABXY, right? And so then I build out the controller a little bit more so that I can easily, you know, access the game in a way that I didn't before. And so it removes us having to break apart the traditional controller, soldering things in, and gives us the ability to pop in and just
Yeah,
plug and play. And even
that's
in
pretty
game,
awesome.
I can pull a button out right here and put it over here, and now I'm controlling that, and doesn't have to do anything different.
Wow, that's pretty
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
So you've showed us a few examples of what you've done. Can you explain a little bit like what your process looks like when you adapt, when you work with a client, and then maybe share a few more examples of some of the
Sure.
mods you've done?
Yeah, sure. So the process looks a little bit like this. If you went to our website, so it's warfighterengage.org, and just FYI, this is all volunteer. We don't get paid for this. It's just like we want to do great things for humans,
Mhm.
and we're really proud of that. Being able to just do it on a volunteer basis.
Yeah.
Anything that if a veteran comes to us with any kind of disability or need, then we will help them out for free. So anything that we build, anything that they need, we'll make sure that they get it for free. Um, but what the process looks like is on our website, we have basically a request page. And and if you're a veteran looking for something, if you're just a civilian looking for something, you go to that page and you just kind of start filling out what's going on. Like what am I
Hmm.
looking for? What am I trying to do? How am I trying to do it? And then we will get back with that person and say, okay, so um, let's dig deeper into this conversation. And that conversation will end up being, you know, and I always say, like, it does me no good. Like, usually the conversation goes where they say, hey, well, I can't do this. I can't do this. I can't do this. I can't do this. And I always just kind of say, stop.
Hmm.
What I need you to do is tell me all the things that you have control over, because all those things that you're saying right now, it doesn't serve me a purpose besides
Right.
eliminate. What I need you to do is start adding. So I can abduct a shoulder. Okay, great. I can use that. I can use my feet. Great. I can use that. I can breathe. I can use that. I can move my head left and right, side to side. I can use that. So that's where I really start to exploit the things that they can do. And again, as an OT, it's like a perfect situation where you're, trying to be like, hey, man, there's like so much opportunity here for you. But I need you to believe that you are capable of doing it, right? And
Hmm.
so it might be a situation that looks as simple as this right here, where we pop a controller in front of them and we start playing with it, like, hey, I want you to try this
Hmm.
stick, these buttons. We're going to plug this stuff in. We're going to give it a go. And if this doesn't work, maybe we move this out here, or put a different type of switch, on the floor and work it that way. But it also could be, something that's a little bit more complex. It might look like something like this, where there's a whole, control center that we have to
Hmm.
build for you, and that's mounting sticks in different places. And this little, device is one of those snakes that can move around. We have sip and puff controls that we could use, but really, it could go in a bunch of different ways, and every client is very different. I can't
Hmm.
say, hey, this is going to work for everybody. So it's so that's the process. And so once we get a good idea of what we're working with, then we start the build.
Yeah.
Ken Jones, the founder, the engineer that I that started this all, he lives in New Jersey, and he's the one that makes the buttons and switches and gets them out to people. So that's the process.
Okay. Cool. So, can you talk a little bit more about your organizations you're part of?
Yeah, so actually I recently started a doctorate program, so I actually have I've stepped away from one of my orgs after about 10 years, only because I just didn't have the physical capacity in me to
Sure.
do that. And that was an organization called Operation Supply Drop. They go by OSD these days, and they have some other components like 76 operators. Um, and they are such a really rich and awesome community of people. Where Warfighter Engage, I feel like, does so much work in that physical disabilities realm. I think the Operation Supply Drop guys really have done a lot of great work in that mental health space. And so I was the chief medical officer for them. And how they started, it was a pretty cool story. They started out back in 2010, I believe,
Okay.
maybe a little bit earlier than that, but there was a captain that was in the army, and he saw the potential for video games and theater as a great place to build morale. And so he started a nonprofit that essentially would send video games to people overseas. That's the supply drop. And so they
Okay.
started getting donations and everything, and they would just start sending stuff overseas. Um, and then at one point, they wanted to expand their services, like building bigger communities, around the world. We would work with their NATO and ANZAC allies, and basically having these foundations, pockets of people supporting people, and build this community kind of from the ground up. So instead of having like, hey, there's this big organization that will do things for everybody. We're going to support these communities, build these communities so they can support themselves within their things. And so we would do supply drops. We would have different events where we'd get celebrities involved. We'd have different tournaments, and we'd fly people out to like E3 and different conferences.
Nice.
And it's a really great organization. Again, it was at this point where I couldn't just physically continue to do all the things at one time. So I had to step away. But we're all still very close. They're a great
Mhm.
organization. And of course, Warfighter, we've talked about some of the programs that we do with Warfighter, and a big piece of it is the building of the video games for veterans, or the systems for different technologies, but also we've been supporting our civilian parts as well. I mentioned earlier that we do clinics. I've flown around the country and performed a bunch of performed. I guess that's not performed, but put on several clinics for people with disabilities, partnering with local
Mhm.
hospitals and Microsoft stores, and we basically have really cool situations where we could have a bunch of people there at the same time, and we could help them in different ways, and then almost give them a prescription, like, all right,
Okay.
you're going to need this, and this, and so it's been pretty cool. So those
Awesome.
are kind of our big ones.
Gotcha. So I guess this is just a little bit of a backtrack question, but
Sure.
I'm curious how receptive the rehabilitation industry as a whole has been to the idea of using video games. So and the clients themselves. So I know when I was a therapist, I worked in, and this is a different scenario, but I worked, when I worked at the skilled nursing facility, and like you said, just around that time when the Wii was coming out, you were seeing they brought a lot of the Nintendo Wii in, and we try to get clients to use it, but they wasn't really didn't catch on very
Right.
well, and so I'm just curious what your thoughts are on
Yeah.
that.
I have a couple thoughts. I did mention earlier that it's not for everybody.
Hmm.
If I were to go in, I worked in inpatient rehab after I left the military, and probably 9 out of 10 of my evaluations would come to different conversations that would be like, so what type of things do you like to do for fun? Like, what does your
Hmm.
day look like? Like, oh, I like to read the newspaper and watch my, Price is Right and Wheel of Fortune. Like, you can guarantee that one of those two things are going to happen.
Yeah.
Um, I can also guarantee that an 80-year-old's not gonna be like, oh, I love my video games. The new Xbox game is going to come out. It's
Yeah.
just not gonna. That's not going to be in the conversation. But what I can tell you is that at some point in time, there is a uh, there's going to be this switch, no pun intended, Nintendo Switch, but there's going to be a switch where you and I are those 70 and 80 year olds, and
Mm-hmm.
we're going to have grown up with video games. And there's a good chance that everything else, our physical bodies are falling apart. We can't get out and do this or that. We can't, get down on the garden. We can't, mow the lawn or whatever, but
Yeah.
I can still play video games. And so there's a chance that, at some point in time, there's going to be a conversation that is, oh yeah, I just really want to still play my video games, and it's going to be purposeful. It's going to be meaningful
Mm-hmm.
to somebody. People give me a lot of flack, like, oh, these kids are just in, playing those video games. They should be reading a book or something.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, a video game is a book. It's just a story, and the only difference is that instead of imagining what the characters are and seeing, and reading the pages to the end, that you are interacting with the story. You are seeing the characters, you are being the story, and then you still have that that beginning, the intrigue, and then the climax, and then the betrayal, and then you have the end, and it's a great story. And sometimes that story takes you way deeper than a book could ever take you. Um, so so it's possible that you have,
Mm-hmm.
and so sometimes I'm trying to get people to understand that, again, it's like a TV series where you're watching the show, but really it's just you're in the show, you're a part of it, choose your own adventure, type of situation. And so there's those things there. I love to spit statistics out at people, saying like, I know that you think this, but the
Yeah.
reality is this. People will say, oh, screens this, screens that. It's created a terrible, world, and people are growing up terribly, and blah blah blah. But if you think about it, the iPhone 1 came out in 2007,
Mm-hmm.
and so the only person that could have grown up with screens so accessible was 14, 15 years old right now. you know
Yeah.
they're not
Yeah.
30 years old. We haven't seen decades of lost time and wasted energy doing this.
Yeah.
Arguably we can use games for so many great things. Arguably we're smarter. Arguably we're better at solving problems. And so there's a lot of research that will support some of that stuff. And
Yeah.
sure, there's some addictions out there that are unhealthy. There are things that I want to see more. And should it be monitored? Absolutely. Um, but it's not all bad. So
Yeah. Did you mention you had a video you wanted to share?
sure, I do have a video, and it's just it's our Warfighter Engage video. It
Sure.
basically takes us through, um, you know, uh, kind of where we were, where we've come, and kind of who we are.
Warfighter Engage was founded on the hope that we could empower wounded service members to not only play video games, but to realize the possibilities that come from that small amount of independence. To date, we've helped hundreds of these men and women find new solutions to engage in current and emerging technologies. After almost a decade of service, our organization has grown to include 3 additional programs. Those programs include advocacy for accessible technology, adaptive gaming clinics, as well as non-veteran gaming support for the global community. Our small team of volunteers have been incredibly active in the gaming industry, consulting on everything from accessible design and hardware to user interface during game development. We've had some incredible opportunities over the years to make a difference to those who can't engage with technology in a traditional way, such as working closely with Microsoft on the development of the Xbox Adaptive Controller and consulting with researchers at 343 Industries in the development of their next installment of the Halo franchise. We've used those opportunities to teach and lecture all over the world for new and innovative ways to engage with technology and how to use gaming therapeutically. Warfighters' reach goes beyond just helping veterans. Seeing a need in the civilian community, we've developed a program to bring our knowledge of accessible gaming and technology to workshops around the globe. This has given us an opportunity to help the larger community of gamers who might need some advice or direction on how to approach adaptive gaming. To learn more about Warfighter Engaged and our programs, you can follow us on social media under the Warfighter Engage handle, or visit us at our website, warfighterengage.org.
That's our little video. So
Nice.
yeah.
Nice. That's cool to see some of those things that you're talking about in action there.
Yeah.
Really sweet adaptations.
Yeah. So it's kind of
Summer
nice
strollers.
it's kind of nice just to get a kind of good picture of what those look like, good
Yeah.
idea of what some of the movements look like and whatnot. So so yeah, that kind of gives us the big rundown.
So wrapping up, if people are if I'm if I'm hearing about this and interested and possibly looking at how I can participate in video games again, what's the best way to get a hold of you? And second of all, I guess, do you have any message you have for people out there who are wanting to get back into gaming and looking for a place to start, I guess?
Yeah. So easiest place to find us is warfighterengage.org. That's our website. You can follow me. I post a lot of different things from there. My Instagram and Twitter are OT Unleashed. And so it's easy to find me. But if you're looking to get back into gaming and everything, I would definitely kind of just pop a message over to us, give us a shout out, like give us a call. We can definitely work with you. And if I have any therapists out there that are thinking about maybe using some stuff, or maybe maybe there's some people that aren't sure about it. I just I'd like for you to kind of think about, what does this look like in the future? We're all technology is definitely not going anywhere. We're going to this place where we're going to really need to embrace this some way. So what's the best way that you can do that? And so I just want to challenge you to really start to embrace that, because we do want to remain generationally relevant, and we do want to make sure that we're giving the best possible treatment opportunities for our clients. So yeah.
Well, cool. Well, Erik, thanks again for joining and sharing what you've done. It's really inspiring. It's really cool.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I
Awesome.
appreciate y'all having me on.
For sure. All right. Well, take care.
All right. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you soon.
Yep. Bye.